Hey students, good morning. Today is September 11th, uh, 2020, in the year of COVID. It's also the anniversary of the attack on uh, the Twin Towers in New York City. So I hope that you all observe a moment of silence for those that passed away in that horrible terrorist attack on the United States. It's the largest terrorist attack ever to this date. And also remember that on average there are 3,000 people passing away from COVID every 2 days in the United States. So hopefully we can get um, this uh, under wrap here soon and get back to the United States that we once knew. Okay, today we're going to talk about uh, Spanish Texas and also the influence of the French and any other Europeans that came to Texas. I cannot give you a good representation of Texas without uh, giving you information on its origins and the background, its European background, of course, because of the Spanish. But I can't give you a full understanding of Spanish Texas if I don't give you a snapshot of what Spain was before they came to Texas. Because a lot of Texas laws and a lot of customs that we have in Texas are derived from the Spanish, okay? Or from the time that the Spanish were here. Uh, the Romans named Spain when they were there. They called it Hispania because of the language. Then they established the Romans really brought Spain out of the Dark Ages. They established laws, they established language, and they established religion. So that'll give you an idea that a lot of what we have is Roman based. We say it's Spanish based, but the Romans brought it to Spain. Now, in 700 Common Era, in the year 700, the Muslims invaded Spain, and they were there for 700 years. So not only do you have Spanish influence in Texas, but now you have Muslim influence in Texas. For example, some of the laws in Texas, divorce laws in Texas that favor women, are based on old Spanish law, which are based on old Muslim law. Okay, that's why divorce laws in Texas favor women so much and give so many rights to women when it comes to children, and those are simply uh, based on Muslim and or modified Muslim laws under Spanish law. In 1469, Spain finally comes down to two kingdoms, the kingdom of Castile and Aragon, and instead of fighting each other, they get married and they unify Spain and they start to expel the Muslims. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella expel the Muslims, or the Catholic kings expel the Muslims, and at the same time in 1492, with the expulsion of the Muslims, we are also going to have uh, Columbus discover the New World. You know, of course, Columbus was from Italy, but he was financed by Queen Isabella and came to the New World. Now, that is the peak of Spanish triumph, okay? From then on, you're going to have a decline in Spanish triumph. Spain will never rise any higher than they did in 1492, okay? Now, with that said, what we begin to see here is that there's going to be consequences for Muslims and Jews in Spain. Believe it or not, the Muslims were very tolerant of the Jews. They believed in convivencia, which meant that the Jews could, if they wanted to, they could worship as long as it was behind closed doors and as long as they paid the alcaba, or a religious tax. And that is one of the reasons that we don't tax religious institutions in the United States, because they had been taxed before in the old world. In addition to that, we also see that Catholics are allowed to worship freely as long as they pay or pay the tithe or pay those taxes. Okay, so in your book, of course, and I look up there because that's where I have the book. Uh, Look into that. You know, the idea of where do these Texas customs come from, and the next time that we think that they're nothing but Texan, remember that Texas tradition, law, customs, language is Roman, Muslim, Jewish. For example, my family, my ancestors in Spain, were unable to move, and they were unable to. Well, they were unable to move after the after Ferdinand and Isabella got married and unified Spain. The Jews in Spain. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart there. Jews in Spain had three choices. They left, they converted, or they were put to the sword. Now, my family was too poor to move, and they were not too proud to convert, so they converted, and we are convertos. The Villarreal family were originally Jews, and they were convertos. Okay, now they had other names for us, right? The people that would convert, then they would be treated poorly because they had converted, and they used to call us marranos. Okay, that was a derogatory term that was used for us. Okay, now if you're interested in that, you know, there are a couple of books on Spain that you can read. Uh, right now, at the top of my head, I can't remember. But there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's about between 3 and 5 books that are really the core books on the history of Spain, the ones that I read in graduate school that really pretty much tell you everything. Now, let's talk about other explorers, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but I'm going to tell you about them, and you're going to be responsible for knowing these. Of course, we have Cortez that conquered the Aztec. Why was it done so easily? Disease, okay? And the fact that the Aztec would prey on other tribes, making it easier for them, okay? Uh, we're going to have people like Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who talks about the mistreatment of the Indians, okay? Of course, in my opinion, the most famous explorer, aside from Robert Caballé Sui de la Salle, in Texas is Cabeza de Vaca. Cabeza de Vaca was the treasurer under a voyage with a guy by the name of Pampilo de Narvaez. Okay, uh, they are left in the area of present day Tampa Bay, and they're supposed to walk along the Gulf Coast, and either they didn't pick them up or they couldn't find them. But what happens here is that they make a couple of rafts. They split the men in half. Half of the men go with, Cabeza de Vaca, and half of the men go with Narvaez. And Narvaez's men are never seen again. They just disappear. Yeah, poof. Right? Se los comió la selva. The jungle ate them. All right? Now, the group that followed Cabeza de Vaca end up in present day Galveston, along the beach in Galveston. Okay? Now, what is the significance of Cabeza de Vaca um, is the fact that he is abducted by Indians, and he walks across Texas over the course of 8 years. So he's the first European to walk across Texas. And number two, he brings the first slave, Esteban or Estebanico, to Texas. Okay, there is actually a really good account of his. He's pretty famous. His account is known as La Relación. Okay, the journey of Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, and he actually walks across Texas and then makes it to Santiago de Compostela, which is in the area of Mazatlan, where he meets up with the Spanish, and then he ends up going to Peru and becoming a governor there. Okay, his slave Estebanico ends up with Fray Marcos de Niza, uh, and not Juan Ponce de Leon, but Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, in search of the seven cities of Cibola, or the seven cities of gold, and he is killed when he gets too friendly with the daughter of an Indian chief, and that is the end of Estebanico. Okay, another two gentlemen that we want to talk about is Fray Marcos de Niza and, of course, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, which are looking for the seven cities of Cibola. Uh, they don't find the seven cities of Cibola, but they do find the Grand Canyon, and they do go and name Colorado, and they go to Arizona, and they go to New Mexico, and there is some speculation that they may have gone as far north as Wyoming. Maybe not Coronado himself, but his men into Kansas and Oklahoma. So that'll give you an idea. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Wyoming, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. That's a lot of territory. That's almost half of the United States that they. We also have Hernan de Soto, and he doesn't really make it to Texas. He dies somewhere in the area of Arkansas, but we talk about De Soto because he's the one that is the quintessential rape and pillage explorer. Okay, um, and then right around 1680, there is a revolt in New Mexico, the Pueblo Revolt, and it causes it causes people to focus on Texas, but it's really fruitless. I mean, why don't people come to Texas? Well, would you have wanted to live in Texas, a couple of weeks ago when it was 105 degrees outside and there was no air condition, where rain is unpredictable? I mean, things are good in Spain, or you can live in northern Mexico or central Mexico where things are a lot easier. So the Spanish couldn't pay people to come to Texas, and so when they do that, then the French come in. That's when Robert Caballé Suy de la Salle comes in. You have the exploration of the Mississippi River by the French. By I forgot their name right now. I'm sorry. But what happens is that Robert Caballé Suy de la Salle, or La Salle, decides that he's going to capitalize on that. Uh, on Marquette and Jolet, I think. I forget. I'm sorry. It's just been a slow morning. Um, and his journeys are a little disjointed. They're unorganized. He loses his supply ship, and eventually his ship La Belle sinks in the Gulf Coast in the area of Galveston. I'm almost pretty sure it's in the area of Galveston, and they've actually created this metal barrier around it when they found it, and they took all the water out of this round barrier. Imagine getting a coffee can and making holes on both ends, and then putting it in an area of water where the top was still out of the water, and then they drained all the water from inside of the cylinder, and there was the bell. Okay, and they were able to excavate it. Okay, now La Salle's journey was just littered with disasters. His men were unruly. He was extremely arrogant. Every time they came across Indians like the Karankawas, they raped and pillaged. So the Indians wouldn't help them. They fall subject to malnutrition, desertion. Some of La Salle's men actually join the Caddo, and they do pretty good. But many of them that did join the Caddo then brought disease to the Caddo, and it helped wipe out the Caddo. As I said, the ship LaBelle is lost, and then LaSalle gets in an argument over who killed the deer. Yeah, a deer, and he is killed by one of his own men in the area of Navasota, Texas. I think that's what they agree on. What didn't die and didn't join the Caddo, the Karankawa kill or enslave them. Okay, and then whatever is left, whatever smattering is left, they're able to go back to France because they go up the Mississippi and come across a French settlement. So they did not establish a mission system, okay? And that area along Louisiana is just seen as a no man's land, okay? Now, what we'll see here is that later on, we're going to have Louis de Saint Denis and Louis de Cadillac that are going to come in. And what they're going to want is that they're going to want to establish trade from northeastern Texas down to San Antonio and then to El Paso to go into Santa Fe or down to Mexico City. Now, the reason that they don't go across from, like, say, uh, East Texas straight across to Santa Fe, which most people would think the way the I-20 corridor is because there's no water there. So you have to come down to San Antonio and then go down to Del Rio, and then from Del Rio you go up to El Paso, and you stay along the rivers so you always have access to water. If you go into the Staked Plains, the Llano Estacado, you're not going to have access to water, and you're going to die. Okay, it's as simple as that. Now the Indians know where the water is, but they're not going to tell anybody. Okay. Now, in addition to that, what we're going to have here is that repeated attacks from the Apache and the Comanche and the Kiowa. What's going to happen is that uh, the French are going to retreat or realize that there's not a lot going on. So what they are going to do is that the Spanish are going to renew their interest in Texas and start an ill-fated journey or mission to establish a mission system, which is not going to be very successful. Now, the deal here is when these individuals come in, when the Spanish come back into Texas, they're pretty much of a iron fist. They say if we don't do this, if we don't rule Texas with an iron fist and force the Indians to convert to Catholicism, then what's going to happen is that we're going to lose it again. So one of the things that they begin to do, because they can't get people to come over, they begin to get wealthy people in Spain, like Juan Jose de Escandon, and they give them these huge tracts of land. And Escandon, for example, settled Nuevo Santander. My family came over with Escandon's people. Okay, Escandon was already in Monterrey, and what they do there is that they go from Monterrey, they go up to the area of Laredo, Texas. From Laredo, Texas, all the way down to maybe Zapata, Texas, but not Roma or any further than that. That area was settled by another group. And Nuevo Santander goes up north as far as almost San Antonio, but not San Antonio, right below Pearsall, Texas. All right. Now, what we begin to see also is that we begin to have interest from men like Marquis de Ruby, who comes and inspects the missions and says, we need to do something about these Indians. The Comanche, the Wichita, the Kiowa, and the Apache, they're 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 raising hell. So what we're going to do is we're going to, where there is going to be a mission, there's going to be a fort. Okay, and that then starts to become somewhat of a positive. Uh, 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 but again, you 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 don't have anything that's going to attract people to come to Texas. I mean, you just got a bunch of land and a bunch of grass, and it's really hot and it gets really cold. So it wasn't very attractive. It wasn't like settling in an area that was productive. Now, the east coast of Texas, more temperate. The Gulf Coast plains, yes, that was better. But, life was still good in Spain. Life wasn't that bad in Mexico City. So, why should we go and put ourselves at the burden of this horrible, horrible, horrible heat, and arid climate? Okay. What begins to happen is that you begin to have the establishment of a caste system. You have peninsulares, which are the people that are born in Spain. You have criollos, which are Spaniards that are born in the New World. And then you have mestizos, like me, of mixed blood. There's markets of viability between the three. Uh, like in colonial America, there's small ranches that begin to break up the mission system, and you begin to have the emergence of the ranching elite. But these people have a lot of land and they have a lot of cattle, but they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of capital. Their capital is on hoof, okay? A lot of these individuals were part of Escandon's group, okay? Now, by this time in the New World was providing 60% of the world's food supply, but it wasn't coming from Texas. It was coming from Mexico and South America, okay? Problems with cattle ranching, of course, you don't have fences, you don't have brands, you don't have boundaries. So it was kind of like a permeable membrane that, if you and I were ranch neighbors, our cows would kind of mingle with each other. And every year in the spring after they would calve, we would cut our herds and mark our own, and you'd mark your own, and then we'd go back to normal. But then we still have to move these cattle from here to Mexico, and then you're not going to really get them from Mexico to Spain. It's too costly. So we don't come across the cattle kingdom until the 1860s and 1870s under men like Richard King and the age of the cattle drives in Texas, which we will talk about later on. We may even watch a movie called Lonesome Dove that deals with that, okay? Now, the twilight of Spanish control that I say, you're going to have an issue in Mexico. Right around 1810, the people of Mexico, or the mixed blood people, the mestizos, are going to follow a man by the name of Miguel Hidalgo, Padre Miguel Hidalgo, and there's going to be a Grito de Dolores, 16, and then for 11 years there's a war, and then eventually a guy by the name of Agustin de Iturbide, who is disgruntled with the Spanish, makes a deal with Mexicans, with Morelos, and Mexico becomes Mexico in 1821. Okay? So in 1821, after 500 years of Spanish rule, present-day Texas is renamed Coahuila y Texas, and it's no longer Nuevo Santander, and Mexico is properly named Mexico. Before that, it was named La Nueva España. Okay? So, a lot of times people say, why are people in Mexico so wrought in tradition and so backwards? It's because for 500 years we were under Spanish and Catholic control. Okay? So in order to modernize ourselves, we have to unlearn 500 years of tradition and culture and then relearn it. Whereas the United States, you start settling the United States in 1680, and in 110 years, you're already fighting for revolution. The other thing that we see here is the amount of space between England and the United States, or the colonies, as to where the amount of space between Mexico and Texas, okay? So that in itself will also create an issue when people say, well, why is Mexico still so backwards? Well, because they can't unlearn everything they learned in tradition in 500 years. Now, what we're going to do now is that we're going to talk about filibusters. And filibusters are very important, okay? Incredibly important, All right, I can't tell you how important filibusters are. And filibusters are individuals or Anglos that lived in the United States. No, it was 1771. Yeah, it was 1789. Philip Nolan Philip Nolan during colonial period and then during the early republic. Philip Nolan is important because he was the first Anglo-American to come to Texas and to rustle cattle and horses and then take them up to the United States, like maybe New Orleans or, you know, Georgia up that way, okay? Now, what happens is that when he's doing this, we're still the Texas is still under the rule of the Spanish, and he runs afoul, and he decides that he's going to conquer Texas. That's what filibustering is. And there is a battle near the Nolan River here, south of Fort Worth, near Granbury, okay, in the area of Granbury. And what happens here is in the first exchange of bullets, Philip Nolan gets struck right in the head by a Spanish musket ball, and he dies right in the spot, and that's the end of that. Now, in 1811, we have the Gutierrez McGee expedition, and I actually have cousins that are Gutierrez whose ancestors were part of this expedition. Now, here's what's so strange about this expedition. Okay, there is a guy by the name of Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara and Lieutenant Augustus McGee. Okay, and what they do is that they want to overwhelm Spanish detachments, and there is a governor by the name of Salcedo. And in the Battle of Rosalia, Salcedo is captured. Now, here is where everything goes wrong. Gutierrez approves the execution of Salcedo. And McGee says, no, you can't do that. And a lot of the other soldiers under Gutierrez's command say, we're not going to do this. We're going to kill the governor. We're all going to hang. So what happens here is that this group, the Gutierrez McGee expedition, fractures. Okay. Then in the Battle of Medina, the Spanish defeat the filibusters. Okay. Now there is a filibuster among them. His name is James Long, and they take the east coast of Texas. Okay, and they're driven out by the Spanish. Now he later returns with his wife, and his wife Jane Long is the first Anglo woman that we think gave birth to an Anglo-American in Texas. Now, he is eventually arrested and jailed in Mexico, and then he is shot while trying to escape. Now, why is filibustering important? Well, filibustering is important because this, after the War of 1812, okay, what's going to happen is that there's going to be an economic depression in the United States, and a lot of the people that live in Tennessee and Kentucky are going to find it easy to come into Texas with the idea of filibustering. And this is going to open the doors for Anglo-American influx into Texas. Okay, it's almost as important as I think that filibustering in Texas is as important as Bacon's rebellion to the American Revolution is to the American Revolution. Okay, so filibustering in Texas is important. Is a center point to the Texas Revolution, as where Bacon's rebellion is very, very influential to the American Revolution. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to go ahead and make this a 45-minute lecture, and we're going to cover the next chapter. And I don't know if they coincide in your book or not. Don't worry about it. Now we're going to go into Mexican Texas, which is 1821 to 1835. But I'm not going to start with the Austins. I'm going to cut this lecture off right before the Austins start coming in, and then we'll do the Austins and we'll go to 1835, okay? Now, political factionism in the wake of Mexican independence, because there's going to be a lot of political factionalism that is going to lead to the Texas Revolution, okay? Now, the treaty that settles the Spanish and Mexican conflict is the Treaty of Cordova. And some of the things that happen in Mexico, northern Mexico and Texas really aren't affected by the Mexican Revolution that much. They're kind of insulated from it. But there is a lot of destruction. A lot of the silver mines were destroyed. They were flooded with water. A lot of the ranches, a lot of the farms, and just general dislocation of people. About 1 million people die in that conflict. We really don't know. Uh, Areas that were sparsely populated, that didn't have a lot of people living in them, now are even further depopulated. And what happens here is that regardless of all this mayhem and Mexico becoming an independent country, the class distinctions are still there, and that's going to create problems later on. That's what we have in the United States when we form the colonies. You cannot start a country with second class citizens, okay? Regardless of whether they're slaves or whether they're peons or whether they're peasants, okay? Now, you're going to have two political parties that are going to emerge, and you're going to have to know these, okay? It's going to be the Federalists and it's going to be the Liberals, okay? The Federalists or the conservative, very conservative, okay? Uh, I am sorry. Let's go back. The Federalists are the Liberals. I apologize, okay? I'm sorry. Again, I had a brain fart there. The Federalists or Liberals, they believe in upholding the Constitution, okay? But they want the states to have autonomy. They want to be able to preserve state power, okay? The other thing that they don't want is that they don't like religion in government, okay? And they believe that in order to have a very strong country, you need a cheap labor source. So the Federalists or the Liberals are in support of slavery, okay? Now the other group, it's going to be the Centralists or the Conservatives, okay? They're members of the landed aristocracy, of the military. They want a really strong central government, and they want to preserve the old Spanish way of religion, social caste system, and the big colonial antebellum economy that they had before. So, in other words, the wealthy and the politicians and the church have all the power instead of the Federalists, which is the state and the people have the power. Now, the other thing that's going to plague Mexico is the inexperienced leadership. It's going to plague it well into the 20th century, okay? When we have the Mexican Revolution, or Mexico's equivalent of the Civil War that we had in the United States. Now, you're going to have the wealthy that don't want to have anything to do with anybody, the church, okay? Okay. Then you're going to have the Native American population in Mexico. And then you're going to have underpopulation problems in Mexico, okay? And what happens is that the wealthy are very aggressive when dealing with the poor or the Indians. So you're going to have this three-way disgruntlement, I guess how you would say, that they're not going to be able to plant the seeds of democracy well into the fabric of Mexico, because you've got second-class citizens. Now, in addition to that, what you are going to see is that you're going to see efforts from these new governments to bring in people from the United States to populate areas like Coahuila y Texas. We need to bring people in, that maybe they got a little bit of money or a little bit of know-how. And that's how the Austins are going to come in. And I'm going to give you a little bit on Austin, and then we're going to stop. Uh, the way that the Austins make it to Texas is that there is a panic in 1819, or a recession after the War of 1812. The War of 1812 ends in 1815, and then you end up having an economic recession that begins early on in 1818 and peaks in 1819. Now, Moses Austin used to have a lead foundry, and while the war was going on, he was cranking out lead to make bullets. When the war ends, he goes bankrupt. He secures a land grant to bring 300 families to Texas, okay, along the Brazos River, starting in at the Gulf Coast and moving westward, okay? The problem is that he dies in 1821 of pneumonia, and his son Stephen takes over. Now, here's the problem, okay? And this is how the problems are going to happen. This is still 1821, where we're under the Spanish, when he gets the deal to come to Texas, and he dies. Now, when he's selling this in the United States, some people get wind of it and say, we're not going to wait for him to go to Texas. We're going to go ourselves. So you've got some families of stragglers that are going to go before anybody else. That's problem number one. Problem number two, he dies. Problem number three, Spain now becomes Mexico, or New Spain becomes Mexico. All right? When Stephen F. Austin finally arrives in the fall of 1821, Governor Martinez indicates that now Mexico, that Spain is no longer a part of Spain anymore, doesn't recognize any of the land grants that were issued by Spain. So it's like, well, wait a minute. We already have people settling here. You already told us we could come here. Now you're telling us we can't. That you want to arrest us if we don't leave. Now, here's what happens. At the same time that all this is going on, Agustin de Iturbide indicates that they can stay, and in 1823, they guarantee Austin's claim. Okay? So, 1821, you can come to Texas. 1821 fall, you can't come to Texas. 1822, hold on. 1823, Iturbide says, yes, the Texans can stay. Then, Iturbide is thrown out of power, and the new government says, which is a centralist government under Guadalupe Victoria, says, no. We don't want them to leave because we don't know what we're going to do with them yet, but we can't have any more coming in. Well, you tell a Texan or a Tennessean or a Kentuckian that they can't come to Texas when they're already on their way to Texas. So it's very important that you understand this, because it's a quagmire, okay? I mean, under one administration they're told that they can come, and in another administration they're told that they cannot come. And you've got these waves that are coming in. Now, right now it's only the Austins, but later on you're going to have not only Anglo settlers coming in, but you're going to have Mexican settlers that are coming in from Mexico up into Texas, okay? Now, under the government of Guadalupe Victoria, they settle a government very similar to ours. And the opposing parties have the very same issues. And they write a federal constitution and state constitution. So you have Mexico has states with constitutions, and they have the federal government with constitution. And the federal government is supreme to the state government. But they can never agree on anything. What they do agree on is that we are going to let the Anglos settle in Texas as long as they speak Spanish, that they become Mexican citizens, that they convert to Catholicism, which a lot of them already are, and that their slaves that they bring in are not slaves but indentured servants that eventually will be released, which they have no intention on doing, okay? Now, it is at this time under Guadalupe Victoria that they issue these empresarios these huge land grants, and you can see them in the maps. You're going to have individuals like Green DeWitt come in. You're going to have Martin de Leon, Lorenzo de Zavala, David G. Burnett. They're going to be given these huge chunks of land, and they're going to tell them, I want you to bring in at least 300 families, okay? And for the most part, they did keep their promise to bring in people, but they did not keep their promise to assimilate. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. Because later on, they're not going to be Kentuckians and Tennesseans, and they're not going to be Mexicans. They're going to be Texans, okay? So the original Texans come from Kentucky and Tennessee. You know, that's where they come from. You know, my former professor and now a former mentor and now friend David Clinkscale is a descendant of families from, I believe, from Tennessee. I'm not 100% sure. And also, they did not, those people that were coming in did not subscribe to Mexico's view on slavery, which they wanted slavery abolished. They wanted slaves in order to promote slavery, okay? Now, why did they want to continue to promote slavery? Labor. I mean, Texas has got a lot of land. You need a lot of people to put a lot of land into production and to make a lot of money, okay? Now, we're going to talk about, remember we talked about filibusters a little while ago, and after this I'm going to end it. You have to understand the complexity of the Republic of Fredonia, okay, and its connection to filibustering. Okay, there was a impresario, a Southern Virginian planner by the name of Hayden Edwards. He was not a nice guy. I don't like him. Okay, he's not a likable guy. I mean, they even have a county named after him, and they really shouldn't. The guy's a real butthead. Okay, now with the help of Austin reluctantly helps him with a guy by the name of Bastrop, Baron de Bastrop. Now, why was he a baron? Because he called himself a baron. He was the Baron de Bastrop. We have Bastrop, Texas now. When Edwards arrives to the granted area, he demands that the settlers that had arrived before him leave or show him proof of settlement. And they said, like, no. Now, this creates problems with the Anglo settlers that were already there, and there's about 32 claims that are questionable. Okay? Now, this becomes a problem because of Edwards's very aggressive demeanor. Okay, he was just a very aggressive man, and what ends up happening is he rubs people the wrong way. He was also a coward, by the way. So this is what he does. There's an election for the mayor that are being held in the Edwards area, okay? And most people favored a guy by the name of Samuel Norris, who was not a fan of the Edwards clan. Now, Norris runs against Chester Chaplin, Edwards' son-in-law, because Edwards knew that he couldn't get elected. That's how much he was hated. And he loses, okay? Chester Chaplin loses, but through political chicanery, they make Chaplin the winner. They do some investigation. They overturn the election, and they give it to Norris, the people that really wanted. Now, Edwards' people refuse to leave the office, and the Mexican government dispatches soldiers to quell the problem. Now, this is where it gets even more I guess, cowardly. Edwards declares the Republic of Fredonia. He says, this area where I have is the Republic of Fredonia, and I'm going to put my son in law, Chaplain, in charge, but I have to go to Washington because I want to get help so I can get some help, and then I can bring in some American troops and we can claim this and I can have my giant piece of land. Well, it doesn't work out like that for him, right? Because all of the settlers flee as the Mexican army approaches, who is supported, the Mexican army is supported by Stephen F. Austin, okay? And the Republic of Fredonia is done with. Now, why is this important? Well, you just can't go and declare your own republic. That's filibustering, okay? But this is seen by many as a precursor to the Texas Revolution. Filibustering, Fredonia Rebellion, it is, the republic that never was. But again, that is the watering of the seed of the Texas Revolution. Now, when we come back, I'm going to talk about, American immigration and Manuel Mier y Terran, who's a very important individual. And then I'm not going to go into a really big deal. I am going to talk about, the Texas Revolution and stuff. But for the most part, I'm going to put it in a clamshell for you. And then that'll be it. So I would say that we are ready for an exam. We will be ready to take an exam by the end of next week. Now, because this lecture is going to be used again, then I'm telling you that I'm at a point in the lecture where probably tomorrow I'll record. We're about a lecture and a half away from an exam. So I will record another 45-minute lecture and then I'll sum it up. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail when it comes to the Texas Revolution. So it is your responsibility to read that in your book. Let's talk about the major players and stuff like that. All right, so thank you for listening. And again, that the views that are expressed in this video are mine and not those of Tarrant County College District. I would like for you to, if you like this lecture, to like it and to recommend it to somebody. If you would like to, make sure that you wear your masks and more importantly, that you be kind to each other. Take care.